Get ready for a clash of titans. We've got Ding Liren with the white pieces taking on Fabiano Caruana in a high-stakes blitz showdown between two of the world's absolute best. Ding opens with d4, and Caruana responds with the old Indian defense. Both players go for a double fianchetto setup, developing their bishops to the long diagonals for a solid strategic start. Development continues smoothly. Both kings are castled to safety, and now the fight for the center begins, with Caruana pushing his e-pawn forward to challenge white's control. Ding clamps down in the center, pushing his pawns to d5 and e4. White gains space, but Caruana isn't sitting still, starting his own counterplay on the queenside with a5. White immediately challenges black's queenside expansion with a4. The knights find active squares, and Ding lifts his rook to f2, preparing to get it into the game. And here, Caruana has a key decision. The position is tense, but he misses the strongest path forward. The much better try was to immediately challenge white's center with pawn to c5. After king to h1, king to h8, queen to e2, and knight to g8, preparing to reroute, keeping black's position perfectly solid. But in the game, Caruana instead drops the queen back to d8, a passive move that lets white seize the initiative. And Ding immediately pounces, taking on c6 to open up the position. After the recapture, he reroutes his knight through c1, heading for the ideal d3 square, and solidifies his advantage. And now, a fantastic move from Ding Liren. He plays pawn to b3. This is a brilliant pawn sacrifice, tearing open the b-file for his rooks and queen to create a powerful attack on the queen side. Caruana decides to ignore the pawn for now and captures the knight on d3, and Ding recaptures with queen to d3. A fantastic find, and in fact, the only move that maintains his advantage. Any other recapture would have let black off the hook. Black's knight hops to c5, and now Caruana strikes back in the center with the pawn pushed to f5, creating new threats and complicating the position. Caruana faces another critical choice. He needs to maintain the tension, but makes a slight inaccuracy. The stronger move was to push pawn to f4, directly challenging white's bishop. After the trade on c5 and the recapture, white plays bishop to h3, but bishop to h6 keeps the position balanced. Instead of that, Caruana plays knight to e6, and this allows Ding to ramp up the pressure. And Ding does just that. He exchanges pawns on f5 and then immediately pushes his own pawn to f4, clamping down on the king side. This push from black looks active, but it's another misstep that hands white a clear advantage. The correct way to play was to simply capture on f4. White recaptures, and after king to h8 and knight to d5, queen to f7, the game remains a tough fight. But back in the game, Caruana pushes the pawn to e4, and this gives white a dangerous passed d-pawn and a winning position. Both players now rush their rooks to the d-file, preparing for a decisive battle over control of the open line. Ding plays the natural-looking knight to d5, but this is an inaccuracy. It lets a lot of his hard-won advantage slip away. The much stronger move was bishop to b6 to increase the pressure. White does manage to win the a-pawn, but while he's busy on the queen side, Caruana launches a fearsome counterattack on the king side, starting with the pawn push to h5. The attack is coming, and Ding needs to be precise. But this move is another slip. The best way to meet the threat was to push his own pawn to h4, and after queen to g6, the king steps to h2. Black continues with bishop to h6, but bishop to h3 would keep white's advantage. However, in the game, Ding plays bishop to c3, failing to properly address the storm brewing on the king side, and Caruana does not hesitate. He smashes the pawn forward to h4, blasting open the lines around the white king. Ding brings his knight back to e3 to defend, but this is yet another inaccuracy. The engine-preferred knight to b6, a surprising move to challenge black's queenside control. The pawns are exchanged on g3, and now the floodgates are open. Caruana swings his queen over to g6, and the attack is on. And here comes the decisive error of the game. The white king is under fire, and Ding needs to find the best defense. The only saving move was knight to f1, a crucial defensive retreat. After pawn to e3 and a series of trades, including this one on c6, white could take on g7, winning a piece and turning the tables completely. But instead, Ding plays king to f2, walking his king directly into a lethal attack. A fatal mistake. Caruana immediately eliminates the key defensive bishop on c3, and Ding finds the only move, recapturing with the queen on c3. Anything else would have led to an immediate collapse, but this keeps him in the game, for now. Caruana brings another piece into the assault, lifting the rook to g7. Ding is forced into a desperate defense, bringing his knight back to f1, and here it comes. A thunderbolt from Caruana. Knight takes f4. A spectacular sacrifice to rip open the position and expose the white king completely. What an incredible move. How does white respond? Ding ignores the sacrifice and captures the pawn on d6. It's a very human move, but it's an inaccuracy. The best chance was to accept the sacrifice and take the knight on f4. And now, the brilliant follow-up. Not a check, not a capture, but the quiet, deadly queen to g4. This amazing move sets up an unstoppable attack, trapping the white king and sealing the deal. Now forced to react, Ding plays pawn takes knight on f4, a great find and the only move that keeps him fighting. And here's the point of black's last move. The queen recaptures on f4 with check. The king must go to g1. The queen returns to g4, and now knight to e3 follows, and black is winning material. In this winning position, Caruana gets a little imprecise. This check isn't the best. The most clinical finish was to first take the pawn on f4 with check. After king to g1, queen to g4, knight to e3, and then queen to g5, winning a pawn cleanly. But in the game, he instead takes the bishop on g2 with check, which gives white a chance to squirm out, and Ding finds it. King to e1 is the only move, a fantastic escape that allows his king to run from the danger zone. An amazing defensive resource under immense pressure. The attack continues as the queens dance around the board with both players navigating the razor-sharp position. Caruana gives a check with queen to h4, but this is another inaccuracy. The winning idea was rook to h7, preparing to swing the final piece into the attack, and after escaping the worst, Ding makes the final, fatal mistake. This move loses on the spot. The only way to survive was to run with the king to d2. After rook to g4, queen to d4, queen to h8, and this queen trade would win the queen and save the game for white. But that's not what happened. Ding played queen to f2, and this time there is no escape. Caruana plays queen to h3. It's not the most precise move. Queen to h1 was even stronger, but at this point, white's position is completely lost anyway. White tries one last defensive move with knight to e3, but it's no use. Caruana slams the rook down to g3, and the threats are overwhelming, and at this point, Ding Liren resigns. A chaotic, brilliant, and back-and-forth blitz game ends in a victory for Fabiano Caruana. Ding saw that there was no defense because of this coming line. The king would have to run to d2. Black's king simply improves to f7. White tries rook to g1, but rook to f3 creates unstoppable threats. And after queen to g2, the white king is hopelessly trapped, and mate is unavoidable.